as we go along. And then we'll have a Q&A at the end as well. So if you have any questions, you want to hold them till the end of the session, please do, and we'll get to you at that time as well. Again, we are streaming live on Facebook. I just realized that the Facebook Live connection was cut off for a little bit. We're back on, and so streaming live now as we speak. So it is now my privilege to introduce our presenter for this evening. And as you all know, the Friends of the THC's motto is preserving the real places and real stories of Texas. So storytelling is key to the work of preservation. It is key to the work that we do, fundraising for historic preservation. And it's key to the work that our staff at our historic sites do. They tell stories about Texas history in a way that engages people every day. And that is true for our presenter tonight, Barbara Judkins, who is the site manager at Starr Family Home State Historic Site in Marshall. This is one of THC's 38 historic sites. And Barbara has been working in the museum industry for over 23 years. And on January 16th of this coming year, she will celebrate her 10th anniversary with the Texas Historical Commission as site manager at Starr Family Home, which congratulations for that ahead of time, Barbara.
Thank you.
Barbara loves the beautiful site, set against the backdrop of tall trees and green grass in a neighborhood full of historic homes. Barbara has been married to Kenneth for over 35 years. She has 2 grown children, a wonderful son-in-law, and grandchildren arriving in the spring. So lots to celebrate this coming next 6 months or so. Barbara loves a good book and spends as much time outside as possible, gardening and volunteering with the local chapter of the Texas Master Naturalists. But family always comes first for Barbara, with her love of history a close second. She considers it an honor to have been able to have spent the last over 2 decades talking to guests about Texas history and the very colorful past of the state. Barbara is joined today by site educator Megan Cromeans, who will be doing the demo for us today. So let's join Barbara and Megan for this fun romp through an 1880s kitchen. So Barbara, all yours.
Well, it's a fun, hot romp through this 1880s kitchen because if you can see, Megan, you want to open the firebox? We do have the fire going. We needed to get the oven up to, we need to get the oven up to about 450 or 350. It's, I think, what was it at now? 400?
We really wanted to shoot for 400, and I think it's around 425 right now.
So what Megan is doing is making some biscuits. You want to show them the biscuits we test made a batch to make sure that we were going to be on track tonight, that these biscuits would cook while we were talking. So these are called Johnny's Biscuits from a website called allrecipes.com. I've been making these for years here at the site, and that's what we're making tonight. So you can watch Megan get the biscuits ready and listen to me talk. So tonight we're going to talk about this beautiful kitchen that we're in. It was restored between 2015 and 2017. It took us quite a while. It was a laborious project and one that you have to be meticulous about because it involved tearing out, adding back in, moving electricity, and fixing problem issues. When we tore off sheetrock, we would find something that needed to be fixed. So we're going to talk a lot about that. We're going to talk about 19th century kitchens versus modern kitchens. We're going to talk about the domestic staff that worked here. We're going to talk about the Starr recipe collection. We have not a mammothly large one, but a very large one, a lot of handwritten recipes by the family. We'll mention the Michigan State University Feeding America project, which includes 76 scanned-in searchable cookbooks from the 18th, 19th, and early 20th century. We will be giving you those links. I won't be able to give it to you right now, but I'm sure I've captured your email addresses, and Anjali will share that list with me so that I can email you links to some of the things we mentioned today. And then to wrap up, we're going to talk about how we use the kitchen today. It's obvious we use it to cook in, but there are some other ways that we can utilize this kitchen to benefit the site. And then we're going to talk about why we think historic foodways is a great way to teach history. So let's dive right in. I'm sure that you can certainly see from this, and having watched maybe some historical movies and series like Downton Abbey, how a 19th century kitchen is different than modern kitchen. But one of the first things I want to point out is the table that Megan's working on. That's the central workstation in the kitchen. Normally you and I would do it at our kitchen counters, but there are no counters in this kitchen. And so the table is the center of the kitchen, and that's primarily the workspace, but it can also be used to eat off of. We have staff meetings in here, and on occasion we do have meet for lunch in here, but this is called an inwardly oriented kitchen, where your kitchen at home, your typical kitchen at home, would be an outwardly oriented, meaning that all your appliances, your sink, and your table are on the perimeter of that room. So that's the big difference between a 19th century and modern kitchen. Another is that our tap over there, if you can see it, I don't know if you can, only has cold water. It does not, this was before electricity was in the house, so there weren't hot water heaters. The hot water we are right now heating our water on the stove. So we typically put water in a large thing. Sorry, the word just went out of my, but yeah. And heat it up and use it to wash off and on while we cook, add more water to it as needed. So the Starr family had a water tower installed here. In 1884, Frank had plumbing installed in the house. Most of that plumbing was external because the house was built before he had access to tap on to water. And so he had plumbing installed for 2 wash basins and a bathtub for his mother-in-law. By 1889, the Starr family was able to tap into the city's water system. They had laid the pipe all the way down to this house. And so the Starrs were fortunate by 1889 to have a flush toilet. On the plans, it's called a water closet, but a water closet was installed. And also, to take the waste away out of the toilet, Frank installed a watertight cesspool, which was buried in the ground. So I'm thinking I didn't do a lot of research on that, but I'm thinking it's like a septic tank. The city did have a sewer system in 1889, but it was kind of iffy. There were a lot of newspaper complaints where people talked about the open sewers. But all of this was cleared up by the city by 1904. Frank, unfortunately, had passed away in 1902, but Clara Starr was left with quite a bit of money in the bank. So I'm pretty sure that the chance that she got to tap into the city sewer system, she probably did. She did have her 3 grandchildren living with her, and her daughter and her son-in-law. So another difference in this kitchen rather than yours are the appliances. Our stove is fire fed. We don't have the luxury in this kitchen of turning the stove on and walking away and come back and it's going to be warm for us. We kind of have to stay with the stove. And I will tell you, the oven is really snarky. And when the stove gets as hot as this, I call it the behemoth because it is really hot in here. But we also have uneven temperatures on the surface of the stove and in the oven as well. It does not cook as evenly as a modern oven does. We do not have a refrigerator here in the kitchen. There is an ice box just outside the kitchen that would hold ice, and the iceman would deliver. And in 1880, the Starr's world changed for the good because an ice factory was built just diagonally across the street from them, and they were able to get ice directly from the ice factory every day. Frank Starr says that they got 5 pounds a day, and it lasted until bedtime, and that they, in the summer, almost made ice cream every day. And then there's that whole dishwasher thing. There is no dishwasher. There's a sink and there's my 2 hands. So I always tell people sometime I am the chief cook and bottle washer until Megan came along, and now we share that duty, but we wash our own dishes. There, in the 19th century, for the cook that would cook in here, there aren't any cabinets. They were not typically built in the time period. So pretty much everything was exposed to the air and whatever was floating around in the kitchen at the time. So we do make sure we wash everything before we use it, even if we washed it and put it up clean. There was a lack of pre-made items, like we could go to the store and get lots of canned goods. There were some available in the 19th century, but they weren't as trustworthy as they are now. Lighting was bad in the kitchen, especially on a cloudy day. You can see it's kind of dark in here now. There is sun shining through one of the windows, but it's getting darker in here. So we'll turn some more lights on if it gets impossible. And there was not much knowledge of germs. Germ theory was just becoming a thing. By 1861, Louis Pasteur was doing his experiments, and that word didn't get out for quite a while. So people really did have to watch what they ate, because sometimes it did make them violently ill. And they loved their gadgets, just like we do. So that is something we all have in common. And by 1861, a lady named Isabella Beaton came out with a cookbook. She worked for a guy that was she was married to a man who owned a newspaper, and she wrote these serial articles about food preparation and taking care of your home on a myriad of topics. And they put them all in a book form. And it was one of the most popular books in the 19th century. Lots of people used it. The topics were food, fashion, childcare, animal husbandry, poisons, and the management of servants and invalid cookery. And that would be somebody recovering that needed really bland food. So that is it for 19th century kitchen versus modern kitchen. There are way many differences, but those are some of the ones that we hit on. So what I'm going to do now is share my screen, and Anjali, you're going to let me share it.
You can go ahead and share.
Oh, okay. Okay. Hold on just a second. Let me. Okay. Wonderful. Okay, so what we're going to do is, this is Maplecroft. This is the main building on our site. It is decorated with in the high Victorian style. 90% of all the artifacts you see in the building are original to the family. That's something that we feel very fortunate about here at Starr Family Home. So we're going to talk about the domestic staff now. And oh no, we're not going to talk about. We're going to talk about the restoration of the kitchen. And so this is a corner. If you see the photograph on the left, that is before we tore it out. These improvements to this kitchen were done in the 1940s. So you can see that cabinet. I call it the Harry Potter cabinet. It's really big. A small child could live up in the top of that, but you can see the before and the after. Now, I don't know if you can see that clearly in the photograph, in the after one especially, but that is all original beadboard that was installed in this house in 1870 and 1871 when the house was built. So we felt really fortunate that the walls, when you walk into this kitchen, everything on the wall is original to the house. We are so grateful that the Starrs or whoever was responsible for adding things to the kitchen didn't tear out before they added in. So when we tore out, we had the original beadboard. That even counts for the ceiling. So this is a little corner, and the next slide will have what it looks like today. There are two photographs here, but so you can see we have a pie safe there that we keep most of our crockery in, and then that is the entry door to go out of the kitchen. So this is where our stove is now located. The photograph in the bottom left, you can see the void in between those two cabinets, and that's where the 1940s era stove was. It had a 220 plug there in the floor, so that all had to be torn out. And the photograph right above that is a photograph of the cabinetry that was above that unit. And it took, I was part of the tear out team. It was fun. It was dirty work. We actually all had to go home before lunch and take a shower and come back. But that all had to be torn out. And again, we found all beadboard behind it. So the picture on the left with the wheelbarrow in it, that is that corner right there that you see in the bottom left photograph. And that is all torn out. I think you can see that electrical outlet and the wire hanging out of the wall. So one of the first things before we can go further is to move that electricity. So we did have a lot of help in this project, and a lot of professional people came in to do projects for us. But the electricity was one of the most important things to move around. So this is the picture on the right is what that space looks like now. That is our wonderful, wonderful stove. It's called the Grand Quaker. It was made in 1880 by the Taunton Ironworks of Taunton, Massachusetts. We purchased this stove from the Antique Stove Hospital in Rhode Island from some very nice people. When we purchased this stove and they shipped it to us, we had it in storage for about 1.5 years. And then it all of a sudden got decided that this kitchen would be a working kitchen. Before, our intent was for it to be a show kitchen, something you come in, look at, walk out, and go look at the rest of the house. But the decision was made to make this a working kitchen. So I had to pack, I had help, but we had to pack that stove up, send it back to Rhode Island so the gentleman could make it safe for us to fire. We did that stove is hooked into one of the flues of the chimney right behind it. There are 3 flues in that chimney. There's some flex pipe that run up to the top of the chimney. That makes it safe. Sparks can't get out and get into the attic and cause damage. And the photograph on the left is not the election of a new pope. It was the first time we fired that wonderful puppy up, and we got it drawn, and we were like little kids on Halloween night. We were dancing around. We were so happy that we had done everything correct up to that point. So what I want you to know is that we do have documentation that Frank and Clara Starr did have a stove of about the size that we have purchased or would have had to it because of the size of their family. But I don't want you to think that those are the only size stoves that were available in the time period. The stove on the left is the stove that is at Kreischer Brewery Monument Hill State Historic Site. So you're going to see that again when Gavin does his presentation in November. And it is a stove that you don't have to stoop over to cook. So you can stand straight up like ours, and that surface is about waist high. Now, that little stove on the right, I spent all day cooking on that stove for an event at Fort McCavitt, which is way out in West Texas. It's an absolutely beautiful site, one of my favorites. But that is a stooped over stove. You do have to bend over and to cook. And that day I made tortillas, some stewed apples, and some candied pecans. And I burned a few because I would start talking to people and just let the food go. But anyway, I'd rather burn food than not talk to someone. And these are people that had great questions. So I just wanted to give you 2 other examples of 19th century stoves that were a little different from the one you were looking at, just so you'll know that there was a variety available in that time period. So this is one of the first meals we cooked in the kitchen. The man on the right is Hal Simon. He is our chief interpretive specialist. He also wins the prize as being my longest coworker, or the coworker I've had the longest. He and I worked together at the first museum I worked at in the Dallas area. And then we circled around and then became coworkers again for the Texas Historical Commission. So Hal wins the prize. I guess I should send him some cookies or something. But that is a wonderful meal that Hal cooked for us. So if you see that little picture on the bottom of those 2 pictures that are small, the one on the right, that is cooked celery. Gross. it was spiced, but I don't know. I just couldn't take cooked celery, but other people can. And I think Hal liked it, but he made some good corn chowder that day. And then we had some roast pork and some wonderful fried potatoes. We have made some mistakes, but and so you can't see the mistake, but the picture on the bottom left with the fried chicken and the gravy and the greens, we didn't get that chicken fried all the way done. So I was the first person to take a bite and realize, but we ate the veggies. We put the chicken in a freezer in a baggie and put it in the freezer. And a couple weeks later, we made that big pot of chicken and dumplings on the top right. So we did repurpose the food. We didn't throw it out. But we've made everything from fried okra, macaroni and cheese, soups, crackers. And that photograph in the middle is of some farmer cheese I attempted to make and failed miserably. So we do have epic fails here, but that's just a learning process.
Barbara, can I jump in with a quick question?
Oh, sure.
Related to epic fails. Michelle Ferrer is asking, how long did it take you to learn how to cook on that stove?
It didn't take long and it took a long time. I know that does not make any sense, but cooking with heat is cooking with heat. So I was used to frying and cooking, and I can tell when something, might be done. But also, you have to just remember to keep fighting that fire. That stove has to be fed all the time. When I went down to Kreischer to help them learn how to cook on their stove, they thought I was cooking. I'm like, I'm not cooking. I'm like the technical support. I'm going to sit in that chair over there and tell you when to feed the fire. And that's really pretty much all I did. I let, they're not going to learn how to cook, right? If you do it for them. So I was the technical advisor, and they turned out a gorgeous meal that day. And I think that they hit the ground running. So I guess there was a bit of a learning curve, but it really didn't take as long as you would think. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So this is another restoration part. I showed you food. Now we're going to show you tearing out again. I call this the nook. That was a little part there on the north side of the kitchen. And after we got it torn out, we did tear down to the wall on the right was actually replaced for several reasons. But all of that cabinetry you see there, I mean, you can see that this kitchen on all four sides had cabinetry from floor to ceiling. They were storing a lot of stuff in here. And it wasn't a day's worth of work to tear all of that out. It took weeks, but we finally got it done. That's pretty wonderful when we did. So this is the little area that you were looking at now. And there's that open shelf that has most of our cookware on it. And that's total typical of the 19th century. And even in like Downton Abbey or other photographs you'll see that even these really high-end, royal estates back in the day did not have cabinets. They had open shelving. Oh, and I did want to show you, that's our sink. It's zinc lined, and it does only have cold water. I begged for hot water, but I didn't win that argument. So this is the west wall, and you can see the photograph on the right. You can see that open void there. So after we took the sheetrock off, there was that void there, but we did have some extra beadboard. Like I said, we tore other things out that had beadboard. We kept all of the beadboard and tried to repurpose as much of it as we could. We got to a point where we didn't need it anymore. We had repaired and replaced sections of the wall and had a lot of it left over, but we're not about to throw away original 19th century beadboard. None of that went in the trash. It's at Fort McCavitt. They have a large storage space, and I called and said, can I keep my beadboard there? And if y'all want some, can get it. So any site in the THC, if they need some original beadboard, we have a pile of it for use for the site. So we will repurpose it. That beadboard will not be thrown away. It's precious. But you can see that the pictures on the left side are the before, the pictures on the right side are the after, and then that's the done space. So I like this space way better than the other space. And it turned out really well. And that's our Hoosier cabinet. And if you look at the bottom of the Hoosier cabinet, you can see those two drawers have kind of curved bottoms. That's for sugar and flour, or keeping your other commodities should you choose to. So now we're going to kind of transition into talking about the domestic staff that worked here at Starr Family Home. I think it's important to know that these people came to work just like you and I did. They got a paycheck and they went home, and they were involved in their community, even very early in the time period. So the first documented cook we have is a lady named Lucy Patterson. She appears on the 1880 census as being the cook for Frank and Clara Starr. Lucy Patterson had probably been previously enslaved. We're working on that research. And I'm only going to give you a thumbnail sketch of each of the 5 people I'm highlighting, just because I could be here all night talking about this. And I know you guys have lives out there. But if you ever want to talk, give me a call. I get paid to talk about history. So I'd be happy to just talk ad nauseum. My husband, who has been married to me for 36 years as of yesterday, he has to listen to it. So he'd probably be grateful if I found another poor sucker to unload all my historical knowledge on. But Lucy Patterson is listed on the 1880 census as Frank and Clara Starr's cook. She actually appeared on the 1870 census with her own name. She had probably been enslaved. In 1870 was the first U.S. census that included the former enslaved population being listed by their own first and last name. She is listed on that as Lucy Orton Ingledow. She was married to a man named Alvin Ingledow, and they had 2 daughters, Annie and Jeannie, Valerie. They actually called her Valerie. And they all moved to Marshall, except for Alvin. At some point, he probably passed away. And by the 1880 census, Lucy is married to a man named Booker Patterson, and her daughter Jeannie and another daughter Mary are living with them. I can't find any information on Mary. I need to get out and go to some county offices and do some research, and I haven't done that yet. But she was born in probably May of 1845 and died January 1st of 1917. So her will is there on the left. You can tell that she owned property valued at $300. She had $72 in one bank account. This is 1917, so I know these sound a little low, but there's some bucks there. She had an account in the State Bank of Marshall for $13. So she had a cash of $85.35 and then the $300 worth of property. She left that to her living daughter and her deceased daughter Annie's children. So I cannot find any photographs of Lucy Patterson, but the man in the middle is Lawrence Nixon. That is her grandson. That's Valerie's son. He actually moved to he was born in Marshall and went to Wiley College, moved to El Paso in 1910, became involved in the civil rights movement, and actually helped re-enfranchise African-American voters in El Paso County. He was highly respected. And I was at a conference not long ago, and the lady was presenting on this woman in El Paso. And she said when she got sick, a doctor took care of her who was Lawrence Nixon. So I'm like, I know who Lawrence Nixon is. This is also the other people in this photo, on these photographs, are Lucy Patterson's grandchildren. So I just kind of wanted to show you that there was life outside of Starr Family Home. Lucy did not live in. There's only one person on this entire list that lived in. It was a single woman named Clemmy Fort, and we're going to talk about her in a little bit. But I just kind of wanted to show you that there was life outside of Starr Family Home for the staff. So this is Clemmy Fort, and this is the one I told you I was going to talk to you about. Clemmy Fort actually ended up starting to work for the Starr family, and 1920, that's when she comes onto the census. She's still in the Marshall City Directory and on the census as late as 1959, still working for the Starr family. That's 40 years of work she did for the Starr family. She never married, never had children, and she lived here on site. Like I said, she's the only one of the domestic staff that lived on site, because after Clara Starr died in 1925, her daughter, Ruth Blake, inherited the property and didn't really live here full time. She lived in the Melrose Hotel in Dallas. And so she needed someone to take care of her property for her. She loved Clemmy. Clemmy had worked for Clara Starr. On Clara Starr's deathbed, she made Clemmy and Ruth hold hands and promise to love each other forever. That's how close they were. So Clemmy was considered family. So Clemmy lived here and hired people. As she got older, hired other cooks because she had been a cook. She also oversaw projects in and around the property and kept it maintained in Ruth's absence. So this is Julia. Sorry. This is Annie Julia Graves. And Annie Julia actually worked here as well. She worked at the site for about 25 years. And she was hired as a cook as well. She actually did other stuff. She had graduated from Wiley's cosmetology course and was a hairstylist. She's also listed as a teacher, and she's also listed as having to work here as a domestic staff. Now, she could have been here off and on. She could have been here permanently. I just don't have enough research to tell you definitively. But I will tell you that after the last Starr heir died that owned this property in 1985, which was Clara Starr Pope Willoughby, in 1986, Texas Parks and Wildlife opened this site for tours, and Annie Julia Graves came back as a tour guide and stayed with them for a number of years and gave tours. There are newspaper articles about her. They did a fundraiser and she cooked the meals using the Starr's favorite recipes. But again, she was married. She had 4 children. She was highly involved in her church, Bethesda Missionary Baptist Church, and well respected. And we actually, she died in her in I think she was 91 or 92. We had a former curator here, went over and got her oral history one afternoon. It was a Thursday afternoon. The next morning, we got a call from the funeral home that she had passed in the night. And we got her oral history that day before. So we feel really fortunate that oral history for us is precious and it's golden. She was quite elderly by then, but she did have some new information to give us, and we have since had that oral history transcribes. So Annie Julia Graves was born on December 3rd, 1925, died on September the 14th, 2018. But she, like I said, she was still a strong member of this community, and loved to work and loved to hang out with the people out and about in town. 2 of those photographs, the black and white ones, are of her here at the site. And then the color one is just, I thought it was a nice picture. I thought I would include that for you. So we're going to talk about Era Gaines now. Era Gaines also worked here. She and Clemmy knew each other. So the people in this photograph here are Susie Walton, which was Era Gaines' sister. That's on the far left. The second person from the left is Era Gaines. The third person is Clemmy Fort, and the young girl, we do not know who that is. Kind of the same story as Annie Julia Graves. She was born here in Marshall. She attended Ebenezer Methodist Church. She was married first to a man named Frank Lee, and then her second husband was Gus Grimes. She had 1 daughter, Melba Ann Lee Rice. So Era was born in 1898 in Jefferson and died December the 7th, 1993 in Marshall, and is buried at the Wiley College Cemetery. But again, she was a AKA lady. I don't know if you all are familiar with the AKA, but it is a sorority of very highly motivated business women and women that just work to make their communities better. And so she was a member and was worked her way up to be an officer in several positions with that organization. And so we come to the last person, and this is Fred Lewis. Fred Lewis is his own webinar. That man died at 92 on his way to California to marry his third wife. His first two wives had predeceased him. And he was born in Marion County on December 19th, 1912, passed away March 11th, 2005 in Los Angeles, California. He's buried here in Marshall, though, at Rose Hill Cemetery. So Fred Lewis came to work for Mrs. Blake in, I have this in my notes. Here we go. She came to work. He worked here off and on as a young man, but his parents died when he was really young, and his parents had been divorced, and he was living in Jefferson with his grandparents. And his there wasn't a high school for African-American children in Jefferson. So his stepmother lived here in Marshall, and she had him come live with her so he could pursue his education. And while he was doing that, he started to work for Ruth Blake in 1936. So he was kind of a grown man at the time. And he had worked for her sister in 1931. But what he did was when he graduated from high school, he graduated at the top of his class, and he won a $100 scholarship to go to Wiley. And back then, Wiley College had quarters. So there were 4 quarters in a year. And each quarter cost $25. So he won enough to pay for his college education for an entire year. So he did that, but he wanted to pay back. And he had actually, there's some time had passed. So he was an older student, but not exorbitantly old. But his sister was entering college at the time, and there's about a 9-year difference between them. So what he did was he would go to school for 2 quarters and work a quarter so that he could make enough money to put him through school and his sister. And I dropped my paper. So her name was Mildred. Yes. So he would work to put him and Mildred through college. And that's the way he felt like he could pay back his stepmother for all the kindnesses she had afforded him. Fred graduated from Wiley in 1938. He was a teacher after that in Marion and Bowie County, but he was drafted in the war in 1943, and he was in the military from 1943 to 1946. Here's a cool thing that he did. When he got to boot camp, he realized that a bunch of the young men that he was in boot camp with from the area, from Marion County and Harrison County, didn't know how to read. These were African-American young men. And he was a teacher already, and he asked if he could teach them how to read. That's what he did during the war, is he taught young men that didn't know how to read and write. That was his war service. So, but he was kind of a force to be reckoned with. When he got out of the Army in 1946, after the war was over, Ruth Blake asked him to come work for her, and he did for quite a while, until 1954, when he went back to college and got his teaching certificate, a graduate degree, and became a 6th grade teacher at Dogan Elementary. He was made principal in 1964 and retired in 1968, and was on the school board after that. So he was a mover and a shaker. He was also involved in the civil rights movement here in Marshall, and he worked with Mr. Farmer and other people in and around town to reenfranchise African-American voters here in Harrison County. So
Barbara,
that's the last. Yes, ma'am.
A quick question about Fred Lewis
Sure.
from Michelle. What was his position when he was employed with the Starr family?
He was kind of so Ruth Blake, like I said, didn't live here permanently. And in his memoir, he said she asked him to come oversee some improvements she wanted to make. So all those pictures I just showed you of ripping stuff out is probably the stuff he oversaw being installed. I don't know that for sure, but it would be sad. It would be ironic. But he was kind of in charge of making sure that mechanically there's 6 structures here. So, and it's really muggy and humid in East Texas. So he probably made sure everything was in good repair, and he did oversee improvements and work done on the site if he didn't do them himself. And that was probably kind of just he probably worked with Clemmy Fort, and they just probably just took care of the site and made it, kept it up to a certain standard for when Ruth did come back to visit and when Clara Willoughby did it later. Does that answer the question?
Yes, absolutely. And then in the photo on the bottom right, who are the people with Fred Lewis?
Those are the children of Frank and Clara Starr's youngest daughter, Mary Niendorf. And the young girl's name is Mary. She's named after her mother. She is still alive. Those are her 2 brothers. They're out at Caddo Lake. Starr's own some property out there. And that's Fred there with them. Mary Niendorf, her last name is Hines now. She calls me about once a year. We catch up. She tells me a little bit of gossip. Over the last 10 years, I've managed to tease some good juicy stuff out of her, and we are washing dishes, so I'm sorry about that, but this is a working kitchen, everybody. So but that's the Niendorf children. They were all very close. Fred was very close to the family and stayed in contact with him for the rest of his life.
Thank you.
So I believe that is my last slide, so I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to come back live. Can you see me? Can you see me, Anjali?
Yes, I can see you.
Okay, great. I'll back up. So I guess the last part, outside of if anybody has any questions, and I give tours for a living, so if you want to interrupt me while I'm talking, you go right ahead and do that, because that's how we roll around here. But the last 2 parts that I wanted to talk to you about was how do we use the kitchen? And I had my notes that, give me just a second. Let me.
In the meantime, can I throw?
Oh, no, it's right here. I'm sorry.
Can I throw a couple of questions at you in the meantime?
Sure. And I found my notes, but let's do the questions first. Okay.
So going back to the cooking, Roy is asking, was all the cooking in cast iron in the 1880s?
Not necessarily. Hold on just a moment. Would you hand me one of those enamel things? There was also a enamel covered metal like this. We have several pieces of that. And we do have some copper. We have some copper poachers and things like that. So no, not all cooking was necessarily, I love this piece right here. So this is also enamel, gray enamel. So no, not all cooking was done in cast iron. We happen to have a lot of it. And it was all purchased. So pretty much everything in this kitchen was purchased after we did the restoration work. So there's no original cookware. We don't have any original cookware in our collection, but there's no original cookware here in the kitchen. It's either antiques or reproductions.
Awesome. And then Sean is asking, have you used Dutch ovens before? I'm guessing he's asking on this stove.
Yes. There's 3 over there. It's dark in here now. There's 3 over there, and we do use Dutch ovens. We actually have 4 that we bought specifically for the kitchen. So the answer is yes, most definitely we use Dutch ovens.
Excellent. Oh, there's Megan is showing us a Dutch oven.
Oh, there you go. Yep. So that's 1 of 4. So yes. Awesome. Any other questions?
Yes. What is the biggest room in the house?
Oh, that's the East Wing, which was built on the house. It's a bedroom. It was built on the east side of the house after the house was built for Frank's mother-in-law, Sarah Clapp. She and her husband had given Frank and Clara the money to build this house and the money to furnish this house. Not bad if you can get it, in my opinion. But her husband died about 1.5 years after the house was built. They lived in New Orleans, so she sold out in New Orleans and built the wing on for her, which was a bedroom, sitting room, a front door off the porch, so she had her own front door, a a powder room, which eventually turned into a bathroom with running water. And she had her own back door out onto the back porch. So that's the biggest room in the house.
Awesome. And then Jim is asking, what's the recipe for the biscuit that Megan was making?
Tell Jim I can send it to him tomorrow, or he can write this down. It's allrecipes.com, and it's Johnny's Biscuits.
I'm putting that in the chat box for everyone.
And I will share with you guys that my boss loves those biscuits, and I get great reviews every year. Neener.
Thank you. I'm dropping the website in the chat box, and Barbara, what we'll do is we'll get all this information from you, and we send out a link to the Facebook Live recording, and we'll add all this in there, and anything else that you want to share.
Yes, I'm going to give you some more links as well, because what I failed to mention was the Michigan. Well, I did mention the Michigan State University Feeding America. That is, you can go down the rabbit hole on that. Grab a cup of coffee, grab a latte, glass of milk, glass of water, whatever, and sit down at your computer and look at those. The recipe measurements are crazy nuts. Sometimes when we find these historic recipes, we have to do the conversion from, there's a measurement called a gill, or they may say put a wine glass full of this or a half a teacup of this. So you have to kind of go to a modern recipe for the same thing and kind of suss out exactly what you need to put in there, because some of those measurements are a little out of this world.
Awesome. And then Roy is asking, he's curious. You mentioned that there is a Starr family recipe book. So why did you use a recipe from allrecipes.com?
That's one I've been cooking for a long time, and I like that recipe, and that's the one we chose. We do have some recipes for rolls and things like that we'll scan in and send as a bonus for you all to have some of the family recipes. Let me grab one of the books real quick, and I'll show you. So this is one of the books from our collection. I'm going to set the mic down, so if my voice sounds like it's far away, that's just because. And these are all, I know this might be hard to see. These are all handwritten recipes, just like we find recipes that, our friend Sally has, or Anjali had brought something to the potluck that was delicious. And so there's tons of these. There's several of these books that have recipes that were cut out of a newspaper, handwritten recipes. Sometimes it has the person's name on it of either who liked it or whose recipe it was. We also have a couple of books full of menus. Here's a menu here. I chose this one because it has an aspic salad in it, that good old 19th century and 20th century gelatinous loveliness. So I thought these were pretty cool. So yes, I did kind of go out of the realm of the 19th century to make those biscuits, but it's my favorite recipe. That's it.
Thank you. And if you'll send us some links and names of these books, we'll share them with
everybody. Sure. I'll do that first thing in the morning. I'll get it to you, Anjali.
Thank you.
So to wrap up, what I wanted to talk about was how we use the kitchen today. So cooking in it, historic interpretation, but we also teach staff from other sites. They come here to cook for us. I mentioned that I've gone to other sites to help teach them how to cook. So this kitchen has really been a boon for the site. We were able to outreach to our own coworkers, and we have the most marvelous coworkers. It's so fun. So getting to go to another site and to hang out with your friends and work, not even an air quote, we actually do work. It's a blast. I mean, I can't believe they pay me money every month, but I hope they continue for a while. So, but we also outreach. We're talking about doing some live stream videos for the classroom. Megan and I have started. She's new. She's been here about, how long have you been here? 6 weeks? She's been here 6 weeks. So we're talking about maybe doing some live stream specialized programs for classrooms. And also we can make revenue off of this kitchen by offering cooking classes for people that want to come in and learn how to cook on a wood burning stove. That hasn't been posted yet, and it's not all the way approved, but that is something that we're looking at. So yeah, we are monetizing it, but it's still going to be fun. You're still going to get a great experience to come in here, build a fire, cook your own food, and eat it and take home the leftovers. And finally, why do we think Historic Foodways is a great way to teach history? My admin today said everybody eats. We do eat, and it's a great way to have a relatable subject or topic to give to people. Also, it helps us explore history through that food provides an insight to cultural identity. Food shows the importance that the roles food play in our lives by connecting us to our other generations, our great-grandparents. I'm cooking like my great-grandmother cooked, and I never met any of those women, but I at least know that how hot it is when you cook over an open over a fire. We can also use foodways to teach farming practices, local farming practices. We can teach food trends like that disgusting hot celery I mentioned earlier, or the aspic, or other food trends. It wasn't that disgusting, but I'm just being dramatic. But there are other food trends that 19th century food trends that we can talk about. And the influence of food from other cultures has an impact on our own food choices. Who doesn't like a good Taco Tuesday? So that's just an example of how other foods from other cultures can have an impact on our food choices. So that is all I have for you tonight, and I'm here for as many questions as you have to ask.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Barbara and Megan, for your time this evening. It's really fun to watch, and thank you for sharing all the images and walking us through how the kitchen was restored. It's really neat to see sort of the space brought back to its old glory. And Megan is trying to show us something. What is that?
Those are the biscuits that they smell delicious. And even though it's hot in the kitchen, we're going to take some biscuits and some butter and some honey and glasses of water and sit out on the stoop and eat our biscuits after this is all over. So anybody wants to drive over and join us, you're more than welcome to.
Wonderful. We have a few more questions for you,
Okay.
Some comments. I'm just going to share that. Jerry is talking about when you were talking about recipes, old recipes, and how, they weren't precise. Jerry just mentioned that one of their old family recipes calls for egg-sized butter. So, measurements were kind of loose and, easy.
Yep.
And I grew up, I learned cooking from my mother, who obviously learned from her mother. And even today when I cook, if you ask me measurements, I couldn't tell you. I just, we just throw stuff in and,
That's how my mother cooked, but I'm a measurer. I'm a total measurer. My mother would have me stand in the kitchen, and she would sit in our living room. We lived in a really small house, and she would say, "Make a cake. I'm going to tell you." And I would just pour the flour until she told me to stop. And that happened way more than one time. I was always amazed that silly cake turned out great. I could not do that in my own home. I could only have done that with my mom sitting there.
Yeah. Sean is just saying this was great. Thank you so much. I believe this is a neat way to teach history. We absolutely agree with you, Sean. Foodways is such a wonderful way to teach history and also connect people to that history.
It is.
Michelle asks, this is regarding the fire-fed stove. Since the kitchen was inside the house, what was the fire danger risk? I mean, how did they deal with that?
Well, there were 3 flues in the chimney, so all those flues were enclosed in brick and fed out through the chimney. So, outside of 150 years later, when we take precautions because mortar degrades over time, so that's why we had to seal our. We didn't use just the flue. This kitchen actually is detached. If you look at a photograph of the back of the site, and actually I'll send that to you, you can see it. But it was connected by a breezeway, which eventually Frank had enclosed because he didn't like getting cold when the food came from the kitchen to the dining room. You had to open the door.
Got it. Got it. All right. Let's see. Susan asks, was the original china, in one of the pictures you showed the china, which was maroon on white.
Yes.
Is that original china or?
No, we have one set. They had many sets. So one of the descendants is alive here in town, and she has probably, I've heard, I haven't been to her house, about 10 or 12 sets of china that were originally here in the house. The only set we have is actually from the 1960s. So that was Ruth Blake's era. That dinnerware you saw us using, that is a pattern, that is a pattern similar to one that was from the 19th century, but that's what we use when we do our foodways demonstrations. And if we eat in here, we'll use that.
Okay. And then how many people did they sit at the dining room table?
At the dining room table, we have enough leaves and enough chairs to seat 20.
Oh, wow. That's a big table. That's
a big table. It right now seats, I think we have it set to seat 8.
Okay. Wonderful. I think that's all the questions that we have. You can see in the chat, everyone really enjoyed the presentation. Thank you. Thank you to you and Megan again for taking this time, for sharing with us the stories of the Starr family and the story of this kitchen. And enjoy your biscuits and your water.
Thank you very much. Well, you all have a nice evening.
All right. Thank you all. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Have a wonderful evening.
That was fun.